your flesh and blood.
Welcome to Tell Me Your Story, new paradigms for a new world where we're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. We are here 9 times a week, Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., Wednesdays at 9 a.m., and Monday through Friday from 8 to 9 a.m., streaming live at all those times at richarddugan.com. We are on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM, as well as YouTube, where you can watch these conversations. I hope that you will take time to subscribe and click notifications so that when a new conversation is posted, you'll be notified and you'll be able to tune in, listen in, and learn, and be entertained and inspired. A reminder that Choices, which is my book, 5 Steps for Life, it's available on Amazon.com in paperback, hardcover, and Kindle with Audible, soon to be released. We also ask that if you can support the work that we are doing financially, we do have a PayPal account. It is there for your security as well as ours. And when they ask for an email address to whom you're sending, please go to richard@richarddugan.com. That's the email address. If you go to richarddugan.com, there is also a link directly to PayPal so that you can send us whatever support you can. And we thank you to those who have helped and to those who will help. We also ask that you take time during this decade of perfect vision, the 2020s, to go within to that quiet, peaceful, calm, still place and listen to that still, small voice. And with that, we now take you to our very special interview and guest here on Tell Me Your Story. Welcome to Tell Me Your Story. I am Richard Dugan, your host, and we are joined today by Don Sanders, who is going to help us to basically find a way to find that creative process for rebuilding a life. When your world ends, God's creative process for rebuilding a life. And Don, thank you so much for joining us here on the program.
Thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
This is something that I know a lot of people are having to do. Here on the West Coast, people have just gone through a horrific January. Other parts of the world, same thing. I mean, every day somebody's going through something. And, and I've thought an awful lot about this in terms of the folks down in Los Angeles, particularly, because it's closest to us here. And the thought that occurred to me was the last time that I had to start over with nothing was when I was born into this world. I didn't have anything. Now, granted, parents, they were there to take care of me, to feed me and clothe me and clean me and so forth. But I haven't had that experience that a lot of people are experiencing, where they actually walked out of those ashes with nothing more than the clothes on their back and hopefully their family members around them. I can't even imagine what that's like. And I'm not sure if we're going to go quite that far into this aspect of rebuilding a life, but it seems like as good a place to start as any, because a lot of us who haven't been through that, we think that our dire circumstances and catastrophes and this and that and the other thing are really, really bad until we start thinking about someone else who has actually had it a whole lot worse. First of all, thanks for being with us, but also thank you for bringing this subject to our awareness here on the program. Talk to us a little bit about not just the comparative aspects, but who should be listening to this?
Well, I wrote my book, and I speak to a lot of people who have been through soul-crushing, catastrophic, life-altering events and disappointments. But my message also works for people who are just simply in transition. I will say this about people starting over from scratch. What I found in my journey is that often when we feel like we're starting over with nothing, we have more than we realize. And I say that because we bring to this situation something we didn't bring in the description you were talking about when we were growing up,
Mhm.
right? Which is a whole lot of wisdom and experience that we didn't have the first time around. And so, one thing I did notice when I was rebuilding this most recent time, because I've rebuilt a few times, but this most recent time of rebuilding is that I did have that wisdom, right? I wasn't starting over without that. And I knew specifically what I didn't want, even if I didn't know what I wanted, because a lot of times we get stuck with, well, I don't know what I want. But because of the experiences I had had, I knew what I didn't want.
Mm. And what was that? What did you not want?
I did not want another unproductive, painful relationship. I have learned that I would rather be alone than in a painful, um, unproductive relationship. I kissed a few frogs, let me just say that. On my journey, I kissed a few frogs that did not turn into princes. They were just frogs.
Hmm.
And I stayed with one frog in particular for years. Even though the relationship was only like 3 years long, that was like 2 years and 6 months too long.
Yeah, I think that a lot of us can attest to that. Mine in that instance was 15 years, and it was actually probably 5 years too long. It was those last 5 years that, and what's funny is my attorney, my divorce attorney at the time said that it would have been better if you had called it quits 5 years earlier, because somehow that's a magic 5 years there that obviously says to the courts something more than what you want to say. It's like, well, you hung out that long. What the heck's your problem? But it's interesting how, there are a lot of different traumatic experiences that you've sort of touched upon the catastrophes and the disasters and so forth. Soul crushing more than physically crushing. Because I look at what happened in Los Angeles more on the physical, but it's also soul. It's also there too.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, so what were some of the things that you learned going through these various processes, as well as the latest, that helped you to put together this particular work so that people would have a place to go to, step by step, so to speak, answer the questions that they have, get answers to them, for example, and are able to then move on to, in let's just use your example in the case of relationships, a healthy relationship that is mutually beneficial and supportive. My mother and father, I interviewed them on this program 10 years ago. And one of the things that they said was they supported each other in their hopes, their dreams, and their desires, and that they both had each other's backs. And I have to wonder, and they almost met. My father almost made it. 62 years married, passed away in March of last year of 2013, 2023. Um, but it's like they were there for each other. They supported each other, but they also had their independent lives in that respect as well. So what were some of the lessons that you learned
With relationships in particular,
in
one
particular?
of
But
the,
we can broaden it out, to
okay.
to say, hey, what about I've had this soul crushing experience. I lost a job, I lost my house, I lost this, that, the other thing. I'm transitioning from this place to the other. I have to move, or now I'm on. God forbid, I'm on the street. But
Hmm.
what are some of the lessons that you've learned that you're passing on to folks through the book, through this work? When your world ends, God's creative process for rebuilding a life.
Well, that title, When Your World Ends, right? So when you feel as though the world as you know it, at least,
Hmm.
is
Oh, are you
over.
quoting REM now?
I guess I am because I that's how I felt at the time, right? That my world had ended. And when I say at the time, um, not only I've experienced a divorce, I experienced a broken engagement, I experienced the loss of at least two children through miscarriage, and then and 6 months apart. So I had a miscarriage, and then 6 months later had another miscarriage, and then 6 weeks after that, lost my second husband to a sudden heart attack. And I woke up the next morning feeling as though my world had ended.
Mm,
That all the hopes and dreams that I had placed in having a family, I was we met late in life. We didn't meet until I was 40 years old. He died 3 years later. Um, no, he died 4 years later, but 2 of those years we were just seeing each other, right? So we met at 40, dated for 2 years, and then we're married for 2 years. But now he's gone, and I feel like my world has ended. And I'm waking up the next morning not wanting to go on. Now, I didn't do anything to hasten my life, but I just had no motivation to go on anymore. I could not see my life differently because every picture I had of my life, he was in, right?
mm,
And when I say that, like vision in my mind's eye, how I saw my life, he was in. And I woke up every morning not wanting to go on. But then I finally woke up one morning realizing, as much as I was wishing to not wake up the next morning, I went to bed wishing I wouldn't wake up. I kept waking up. And so after so many of these mornings of waking up, I went, okay, well, apparently my life is not ending today. My world may have ended, but my life did not. And so,
mm,
what am I going to do? And I said, I'm going to have to build a new world. I'm going to have to figure out how to enjoy my life going forward. And so the first thing I realized is if I woke up this morning, I have an opportunity to make my life better. It may not feel great, but I have an opportunity to experience joy today. And am I going to take advantage of that opportunity, or am I going to continue to feel bad? And after a certain point, sulk because my world didn't turn out the way I wanted it to in the short term. And I say in the short term because I'm still here. There's still time to make my life better. And I basically am wasting at a certain, I came to a point where I was losing time
mm,
because I wasn't taking advantage. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't want to minimize anyone's pain, least of my own. Okay.
mhm,
Loss is painful, and I am not in any way, shape, or form trying to minimize that for anyone, including myself. But at some point, we wake up and it doesn't hurt like it did in the beginning. It
mhm.
still hurts, but not like it did in the
Yeah,
beginning. And are we going to go on
yeah.
as though it does just
Do,
because things didn't turn out the way we wanted them to?
do you think that a lot of folks sometimes put way too much weight on certain circumstances and they perceive them as catastrophic or disastrous when in fact, maybe using your example that you woke up and you didn't want to wake up, but there you are, you woke up and okay, I'm still here. It didn't, the old phrase, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger kind of thing.
Mhm.
You think that
I don't want to, I'm sorry.
I just was going to say, do you think that we do? Do you think that we do that?
I don't want to say we put too much weight on it because I really believe that the reason we hurt the way we do is because we cared as much as we did,
Hmm.
right? And that the amount of pain that we feel can be, related to the amount of feeling that an investment that we put into it. And so I don't want to say that we put too much into it or I don't want to say that I put too much into my love for my husband before he died, right? I don't want to say that. But what I want to say is that we can carry that weight too long.
Mm. Okay, that's a better way to phrase it. I think. I think that's a better way to phrase it, that we carry it too long.
That,
But at the same time, we're all told when it comes to grief, for example, that we all grieve in different ways and
Mhm.
at different times. So how do we modify that to recognize and appreciate and acknowledge that yeah, somebody is really hurting, is going through whatever it is they're going through, and that there are those who say, and you need to let them go through it. You need to let them take the time
And
when.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. That's why
Okay,
I said I'm not trying to minimize
right.
anyone's pain,
Hmm.
and I'm not trying to shorten anyone's grief process. What I learned through this is that grieving and rebuilding are different,
Okay.
right? And that we can finish our grieving process and then wake up one morning going, I don't know how to move on. And we're more upset over the fact that we're struggling to move on than we are grieving the loss,
Hmm.
right? And
Interesting.
so we transition from the grief to the rebuilding. But the rebuilding doesn't happen because we're not sure exactly what to do or how to do it. And I think part of the reason we're not sure is because I didn't understand that grieving and rebuilding were different. I thought when I got finished grieving, then my life would, just start moving forward, right? That I
Yeah.
didn't really even have to do a whole lot to participate in it moving forward, that I
Right.
could basically just drift to happiness
Yeah.
as a
Yeah.
result of my grief ending. I
Yeah.
don't I don't necessarily agree with that. That after we have finished grieving, we then have to start taking action to move forward.
Well, there's a big one for you. Have to take action. And sometimes, well, like even like what you just said about getting up, waking up. It's like I really don't want to do anything. I really don't want to go
Exactly.
anywhere. I don't want to be around anybody. I don't feel motivated to accomplish anything today, and so on and so on and so forth. Um, Let me ask you
And
about. Go ahead, please. Go ahead.
And I'll even go on to say that I'm not going to tell someone that they're done grieving. I don't know. Like you said, everybody's grief process is different.
Hmm.
And so I do not want to be as arrogant as to say, oh, well, you're done with your grieving process. In fact, I encountered someone who did the opposite, right? When I was grieving my husband, I chose to go to church. And I chose to go to church through that season, even though some people stay home, but I chose to go because in that time in my life, I had quit my corporate job and was starting our ministry.
Hmm.
And basically, my schedule was my own. And so the only things I really had on my schedule that were outside of me that were not subject to me moving them around were my church activities. And so I used my church activities to help me not wallow, not to help me not grieve, because I would go to church and sometimes cry. A song might bring my husband to mind, and I would cry. We were very active. I still am very active in my church, and so many people, upon seeing me, would remember my husband was had passed, and their would reconnect with their grief,
Mm.
which would intensify, not reconnect, because I never disconnected from my grief during that season, but would intensify my grief. But I mention this because there was someone in my life at that time who made the comment because I was there and I wasn't crying in the moment she saw me, said, look at her, she's not even grieving. And I was like, you didn't realize that I didn't, Bible study started at 7 p.m.
Hmm.
You didn't realize that I didn't get out of bed until 6:30, right? That I didn't get here until 6:58,
Mm.
right? But yet you're going to say I'm not grieving. So no, I would never presume to tell someone that they're not grieving.
Yeah.
What I would say is at some point the grieving process ends and you transition to rebuilding.
Yeah.
And only like I said, I woke up one morning and went, wait a minute. Someone else didn't tell me, Dawn, you need to be done grieving,
Right.
right?
Don Sanders is my guest. The book is When Your World Ends, God's Creative Process for Rebuilding a Life, as we continue here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, along with my very special guest, Don Sanders, and she's written a remarkable book that is going to help you, I think, to get through some of the processes that will help you to rebuild that life of yours that maybe you have stepped away from for any number of different reasons. It could be something catastrophic, such as your home and your neighborhood have been burned to the ground, the loss of a spouse or a child, the loss of a job. Even you can even take it to different areas as well, as in terms of maybe having to move, having to do all kinds of different changes. Again, I love the line in that song by REM. It's the end of the world as we know it. Well, I look at that from the standpoint every moment. It's the end of the world as we know it. We can't go back. We cannot go. It's not possible. And that change is the constant in the universe. So I'm curious because you've already I sort of I feel a little like I'm in court. Well, Your Honor, she opened the door to this when she made the reference to God and her faith. I would like to know about I'd like to know about your faith and how did it sustain you, or did it take time for you to get back to it and realize, oh, I'm not really alone. God is still alive and well and working in my life.
Yes and no. So I say yes and no because I always believed that God would heal me. I just didn't know what that was going to look like. I
Mhm.
didn't know how that was going to happen. And I had an anger. I felt betrayed. I felt angry. I felt teased. Like I said, my husband and I had only been married 2 years. I felt like we had just gotten out of, or just getting out of the toddler stage, to be honest with you, of our marriage. Anyone who has been married any amount of time realizes that at some point the honeymoon ends and you start having to work
Mhm.
at being together.
Yeah.
And we had done that. Right. I remember early in our, like about 6 months after we got married, my husband said to me, we're arguing all the time. And having been divorced before, I went, dear heart, this is not an argument. This is at least not the kind you're talking about. And the reason I'm saying this is because we work it out. These are just disagreements.
Mhm. Mhm.
And we're two different people. We're not going to always agree 100% of the time,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
We're just working out the details that we had not worked out before we got married. And it was funny how we had talked about who was going to do the dishes and who was going to clean the bathroom, but we didn't talk about who was going to vacuum. And then one day we were like, okay, the living room is a mess. The kitchen and the bathrooms are clean, but the living room is a mess. So now we're having a disagreement because that hadn't been covered before. And so
Wow.
I'm saying to him, no, these are not the kind of things that lead to breakups. When we are not able to work it out, that's when you need to be concerned,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? But the fact that we're able to come to some, agreement, yeah. In fact, to me, this is teamwork. Teams have to have conversations
Yeah.
and work it out. We're just working it out. Now, I also
Exactly.
want to say that about God. I've come to understand that just like my husband and I can have a disagreement, God and I can have a disagreement. And we have to work it out, right? And when I was angry and frustrated, right? And I didn't realize this before, right? And I was so angry that I actually questioned whether or not I really believed in the beginning. But it wasn't that I didn't believe. Like I said, I knew God was going to get me through it. I just wasn't happy about it,
Mm.
right? I didn't want to go through it. And so we had numerous conversations, as my pastor says, intense fellowship
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
about our not seeing eye to eye during that season.
Yeah.
And I realized, and it was funny because I didn't, I'm sitting up here having this disagreement with God that I didn't realize on those terms that I was having. right? But that I was basically out of alignment with the God of the universe. And how did I expect to move forward out of alignment with the God of the universe? And that I needed to get in alignment if I wanted to move forward, which wasn't an easy process. And I'm thankful for the Word of God because that's where I found answers. My book is a deep dive into the creation story in
Hmm.
Genesis 1. And in the creation story, I saw a few things. And if you let me elaborate, I will.
Please go ahead. Absolutely.
And so the first thing I saw in the description is it described for those who don't know off the top of their heads, in the New King James Version, the first two verses read, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters." That description of the earth before God began to create, chaotic, empty, and dark, described my life. And so when I was reading this passage that I had read hundreds of times before, but during this season of my life, I all of a sudden go, God, that's how I felt when I was grieving. That's how I felt when I thought it was the end of the world. But yet the first three words said in the beginning.
Hmm.
And I immediately thought, God, are you telling me that these things that feel like signs of the end are really signs of the beginning? And that's what I mean about if you wake up this morning, you have another chance. And I felt like if I'm waking up, this is an opportunity for these things that are, yes, part of an ending, can also be the transition point for a new beginning.
Mm.
Especially since by the end of that story, God had created the first two lives. I'm talking about creating life, right? He had created the first two lives. He had blessed them to be fruitful, to lead, and had invited them into his rest. And
Hmm.
I said, how do I get more of this into this story than where I am now? And so I dug deeper. And when I was talking about the pains that I was going through,
Hmm.
in that story, God told the earth to bring forth or sprout vegetation, right? Life. That's where new life begins in this story. But right before that, he said he separated the waters above from the waters below and basically created weather. Many times when we talk about ourselves, our human weather is our emotions, our internal weather is our emotions. I said, God, do I need to separate some emotions? Right? Do I need to untangle my feelings? Because I had a whole bunch of feelings that were not positive, that weren't helping me move forward, that I needed to separate from. And not just feelings about as a part of the grieving process, but feelings about what my life was going to look like now, about the new vision I was getting of my life that didn't have my husband or children, at least not of my body, in it. This vision that I didn't like because I liked my husband in the picture
Hmm.
and having to deal with those emotions.
Mm. We're talking with Dawn, I beg your pardon, Dawn Sanders, and she's written a wonderful book. I think you're going to want to pick up a copy of this. What's the website we want to send people to so that they can get it? Besides Amazon, we know it's probably available there as well. Where else can they go to find out more about you and the work you're doing?
DawnMannSanders.com. That's Dawn, Dawn, Man, Mann, Sanders, Sanders.com. And there you can find my new quiz, What is Your Starting Overtype, which will provide you with one of five sets of results and three action steps you can begin to start taking today.
Hmm. Well, I encourage people to go to your website. And once again, that's Dawn Mann, M-A-N, you're correct, Sanders.com.
Mhm.
All right, go there and find out more about the work that she is doing and get yourself a copy of When Your World Ends, God's Creative Process for Rebuilding a Life as we continue here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, along with, am I correct, Minister?
Yes.
Minister Dawn Sanders.
Minister.
And so she can certainly work with you and help you and go through the processes as well. Can people get in touch with you directly and maybe have a session on Zoom or on the phone if they don't live on the East Coast somewhere?
Yeah, they can contact me through my website. I have a contact page,
All right. We
and they
encourage you
can
folks.
fill out the contact form and I'll respond.
Wonderful. Now, it's interesting. You quoted that the first part of Genesis there, in the beginning, and the earth was without form and void. But then it goes on to describe what's without form and void. Now, I realize this is not a class in eschatology, but that struck me. But it also does make a very good point that you just alluded to, and that is there was a book series that are actually it was a book with a series of stories that were in it that I helped to promote through these programs called Chaos to Clarity. And and a lot of times, like in science, they talk about how there's this chaos out in the universe, and yet out of that chaos, we've got galaxies and stars and comets that are going this and the way and that and the other. And I mean, in our telescopes that are out there in outer space, like the Hubble or the James Webb, are showing us it doesn't look that chaotic from a distance, and as you get closer, maybe that is. But I look at all of that from the perspective that it's neither good nor bad. That's just the way universe is. And I have to wonder sometimes when we go through our stuff, you know, you know what? That's just the way it is. And I don't mean that by saying, well, that's just my lot in life. No, no, no. This is the kind of stuff that happens here on the earth with humans interacting with other humans and dealing with mother nature and the flora and the fauna. This is the process. So let's not be overly surprised about stuff like this that happens. This is, I mean, um, my father, my late father said, eat, drink, and be merry in moderation because nobody gets out of this world alive. And it has kind of helped me as my eldest sister passed, and my father, and my best friend, and another dear friend of mine just recently, actually a couple of them. Um, yeah, it's like, okay, I will shed a tear here and there, but the reality is that I'll be joining them somewhere down the road here. I'm hoping in a little more than 35 years, because I want to make it to 100 if I can. I'd like to live as long as my great grandmother on my mother's side. um, does that even help people to say, look, this is just the way that it is on planet Earth with us humans? God created humans. Or is that a platitude that is like, you might want to avoid saying that because it doesn't really help.
Well, I'm going to tell you, I didn't find those statements like that helpful. People said a lot of things like that, um, that I personally didn't find helpful. For instance, I was told God had a plan. I'm like, yeah, but I'm not agreeing with God right now, so that doesn't really help me, right? And I had people tell me, well, it's bad for everyone. And I'm
Mm.
like, yeah, but I'm hurt right now.
Mm.
Right. And not that I'm trying to be selfish, but that doesn't stop. None of those statements address my pain. And the only way to really address our pain without minimizing it is to just, I'm sorry you're hurting.
Yeah.
There's really not a whole lot else than I so wish you weren't hurting, right? The closest thing that I got other than that is a friend of mine sent me a card, and the card said, um, I don't understand everything, but I understand a little
Mhm.
and I care a lot.
Mm.
And I really think it's that caring, not so much that um, like trying to move people before they're ready. Once they're
Yeah.
ready, yeah, no problems,
Yeah.
right? But before they're ready, I really don't think there's a whole lot we can say to people before they're ready, but I'm here and I'm sorry.
It reminds me too of the way in which Jesus functioned when there were people who were in need, they were hurting, etc. He did not try to raise them up to his level. He went down to their level. And sometimes maybe, and along the lines of what you've just said, maybe it's, could you use a hug? You know? And
And
sometimes that
maybe not
hug,
even phrasing it that way.
yeah,
Not can I use a hug? Can you use a hug? Because then they have to figure out if they
they have to
need one, right? They
process.
have to just, yeah, just say, can I hug you?
Yeah, yeah,
Can I
exactly.
give you a hug?
Yeah, yeah. It is
Right.
just being there. Just being there, right?
Hmm.
More than anything else,
Hmm.
just being there. We are here
Hmm.
talking with Don Sanders and a wonderful book that I think you're going to enjoy. Don is, of course, available for to help to work with you. There are new strategies and tools for personal restoration when previous methods no longer work. It's one of the things that we talk about on this program about looking for those new ways of living because quite honestly, the old ways don't work, and all you have to do is look around you. You just look around, and the old ways are not working. So we've got to find those new ways, which, in a manner of speaking, in terms of what you're talking about, even the new ways are sort of old because they're timeless. They transcend cultures and civilizations and so forth. The role of faith to overcome trauma and loss. What about people who don't have a specific faith? How do you approach them to share with them and support them and encourage them to get out of bed in the
Like you
morning?
said, the principles are timeless
Hmm.
and truth is truth,
Hmm.
right? If it's true, I don't have to say to them, Jesus taught it. I can just
Hmm.
share the truth
Yeah.
with them, right? And that truth will help them move forward.
Mm. You can also navigate crises and rebuild lives on a solid foundation of faith. And again, I think that goes back because I've talked with so many people who don't have a specific faith per se. They have faith, not a specific path per se. And it's important to know that it's one of the things that I remember sharing with people when I was working at a Christian station back in Phoenix. I was there for 15 years back in the 80s and through the early 90s. And it was one of those conversations that could have been held by anybody. It didn't have to be on a Christian radio station because of the way that they spoke. Just they spoke honestly, like you just said. It is not where the truth comes from. It's the fact that the truth is the truth. It's going to be the same. Um, what about being open to, shall we say, our intuition? Are you guided quite often by, shall we say, that still small voice inside?
Yes, I don't, I feel like I have two voices inside of me. One is, and so I'm not sure of which of the two that you're referring to when you say intuition.
Hmm.
I believe that, well, actually, I have more than two, but there are two when you say the still small. Um, and I don't mean that I have multiple personalities. I just
No,
mean
no,
that there's my voice, right?
no.
But then there's the Holy Spirit that's also speaking to me. And that's why I say there's more that because there's also, people in my life. I hear their voices too,
Hmm.
right? But in reference to intuition, I know my mother's voice is not my intuition, right?
Hmm.
But I'm not sure if you're speaking of my voice or what I would call the Holy Spirit's voice.
Well, it's, for example, I get impressions from my father since he's passed on. I will actually if I'm going through something and I'm not feeling 100% sure about it or what have you, and all of a sudden I'm talking out loud to myself, and it's like, where did that come from? And that sounds like my dad. My dad would say that, words of encouragement, Um, but there are times when I am guided and I just trust that guidance. And we can call that the Holy Spirit. Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And yeah, there are all those other voices
I
too, which
think
I try to
both
quiet.
I think both can provide you with guidance. I think that we're made in God's image since we are speaking in these terms.
Hmm.
And because I'm made in God's image, God has given me power. I just talked about how God blessed me to be fruitful and multiply. And part of that is, my own voice is that, I know um, how I'm feeling, right? And I need to trust how how I'm feeling, and not have someone else tell me, right? And I think you can trust that. Now, I'm not saying that that overrides the Holy Spirit. I'm just saying that there are elements of my voice that I can trust. And of course, I can trust the Holy Spirit, but I just don't want to tell people, well, never listen to yourself. No,
Yeah.
I'm not going to say that. Yeah, listen to yourself.
Yeah.
Now, I will also say that if you hear yourself and what I might call the Holy Spirit and they're out of line, I'm going to say which one is speaking truth or what you perceive to be truth, right? And sometimes that's the way to know how to choose.
Yeah. It is an interesting journey one takes, especially needing to, and hopefully wanting to rebuild their life after whatever circumstances befall them. Um, did you fall into the victimhood space for a period of time? Why me? Why is this happening to me? This is someone else's fault, et cetera, et cetera.
No, I didn't get caught up in the whys. I got caught up in the what. What now? Um, yeah, not the why me's, the what nows. But
Mm,
that's just my personal journey. I do understand that some people do get caught up in the whys. Um, for me, the why was God allowed it,
hmm.
right? Whether I liked it or not. Like I said, we were having a disagreement,
Yeah.
right? But God allowed it. And so that was why it happened, right? Because if God did not allow it, it would not have happened, right? Even if it was some person's fault, right? They only have as much power as the Lord gives them. And
Hmm.
so again, I was back to God allowed it. And so for me, it wasn't a why conversation. It was a, okay, you've allowed this. Now what?
Mm. It is an interesting process to go through. Um, when your husband passed, curious as to anger. Was there anger over his passing? As how dare you leave me here all by myself, and so forth. And then was and so forth. And if so, was there also a time after that of forgiveness, more so forgiving yourself for maybe feeling that way? Not that that was a wrong thing to feel, but I know forgiveness and put into that category grace, they kind of go hand in hand in these kinds of processes. When we've sort of come out the other side, we can kind of do that, but not when we're not when we're in the midst of it.
Yeah, and there was a lot of anger, so much anger that I questioned my salvation. Um,
Mm,
so I had a lot of
yeah.
anger. Um, but I'm but not at my husband.
Hmm.
I was not angry at him. God gave me what I feel like was a wonderful gift the day my husband died. My husband was an encourager, and we were members of our youth ministry at that time. It was called Merge, and they had just invited a whole bunch of new people to serve in the ministry. And my husband was on email um, welcoming all of these new people individually,
Hmm.
right? Like, so this group email went out, and some people had said welcome, and these people responded. And then my husband was, "Hey, Joe." right? He was that kind of guy, right? And so he was having this conversation with all these people, and of course, I'm on. It's a group email, so I'm seeing all of these. Mid-morning, he would always call me to just kind of touch base with me, and so during that conversation, um, I kind of just was chiding him a little bit, and I was like, "Oh, so you're having a really good time today?" I see all these emails flying back and forth, and I say, "I don't know what I'm gonna do with you." And he basically stopped me dead in my tracks, and he was like, "Nothing, because you stuck with me now till death do us part."
Hmm.
As if to say he wasn't leaving me anytime soon, but also to say we have chosen to be here, and that death is the only thing that would separate us. And so when he did die, I had the peace of knowing that it wasn't his choice to leave me
Hmm.
that day,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
Because he was saying till death do us part, as though he had many more days to be with me. And again, that's another reason why I didn't have the why, right? Because I knew he didn't choose this. And life and death is only God has the power of life and death, I believe,
Yeah.
right? We can attempt to hurt people, but we don't ultimately make that decision. We can
Yeah.
attempt to hurt someone and they survive, right?
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah. I
you
know
know,
that when my wife's nephew passed away just before Christmas in 24, um, I mean, it was sad for a lot of folks. I didn't know him as well, of course, as she. She grew up with him here up on the mountain here above Santa Barbara. But you hear this phrase. He had leukemia, and you hear the phrase that he lost his battle with leukemia, and something came to mind that no, it's no matter what the condition is, you can't lose. It's impossible to lose because if you go through whatever procedures you want and whatever it is goes away, and in his case, the leukemia would go into remission, he won for the time being anyway. But if the leukemia overtakes the body, he wins anyway because now he's free of that body because his soul is immortal. You can't lose. And I thought,
yeah,
I'd never thought of it that way before. Interesting, you know? And my
my
father the
husband
same
helped
way.
me to see something.
Mhm.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go
No,
ahead.
go ahead. Go ahead.
My husband helped me to see something similar. When we were dating, when we first started seeing each other, I had like 6 months before I had broken up with had that broken engagement.
Hmm.
And because I'm a minister at a church, we wanted to seek our pastor's blessing for our
Hmm.
relationship. And so he was like talking to me about it. And as soon as he started talking to me about it, I started to feel uncomfortable. And he was like, wait a minute, where's all this? A moment ago, we were happy, we were comfortable. What's going on? And I said, well, Pastor might say no. And my husband said to me, well, then he says no. He said, and I take that, he said, it could be a no in that we're not meant to be married. He said, and it might just be a timing thing. But here's the thing. He said, Dawn, you're not going to lose me.
Hmm.
He said, we're in relationship now, and we are going to always be in relationship. He said, we're not yet husband and wife. So
Right.
you're not losing anything yet,
Yeah.
right? He said, we're going to be in relationship. And then when he died, he no longer is my husband, but because of that conversation we had before,
Hmm.
I immediately was like, we're still in relationship, even though we're not married anymore,
Right.
because the Bible is clear. In the afterlife, there are no husbands and wives. And I think that makes sense because, I've been married twice. And so, yeah, that first husband, I'm not trying to be married to throughout all eternity. Um, and so we don't want to have that. So I understand the practicality in it too, not just the spirituality, the
Yeah.
practicality
Right.
of
Right.
it. But we'll be in relationship. And so my husband was on the day he died, he was my friend,
Mm,
and he will be my friend throughout all eternity. And so I do not lose
yeah.
him.
I think that my parents are the same way. I mean, as I was saying earlier, my father, he made it to the age of 91, but he was diagnosed 5 days before his passing with early onset dementia and Parkinson's.
Mm,
And I think, and he is probably very happy that he did not have to deal with any of that in this world. I don't know how long he would have lasted that way, or if he would have said, I want out. Although he did after my sister's, his eldest daughter's passing. I told my mother, she shared the story with me, and I had to chuckle a little. And she, of course, knows how healthy he was, even at the age of 91. He says, I'm tired. I just don't want to be here anymore. Now, he wasn't suicidal or anything, and there were no plans. But that's just how he was feeling because he said to me the night after my sister's memorial, he says, parents aren't supposed to bury their kids. And she said to my father after he made that statement to her, she says, okay, so what are you going to die of? And just trying to put a lightness to it, saying, look, I understand you don't want to be here, but you have to decide how you're going to leave. And in his case, of course, it was those two conditions that had started, and but he was already on his way out due to some I think something else that was going on inside, and I think it was because you've heard that phrase with husbands and wives, for example, the broken heart syndrome. You know, my former wife's mother and father, her father, he had an aneurysm in his brain most of his life. It had been diagnosed, but of course it was inoperable. There's nothing to do about it. And one day it would burst, and of course it did. His wife, my former wife's mother, passed away 4 months later of what they said was a broken heart syndrome. So,
wow.
you know, it's those are tragedies that we look at them that way, but by the same token sometimes the pain is just too great and we just can't make it anymore. We just can't do it. We're talking with Don Sanders, Reverend Don Sanders, if you will, and we're talking about her work, the work that she is doing, the book that she has available for you through Amazon, When Your World Ends, God's Creative Process for Rebuilding a Life. And we're talking about it here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan here with Don Sanders, Reverend Don Sanders, and I want to thank you so much for being with us here on the program to share your story. And I know that these kinds of stories sometimes are hard to tell, but you seem to be quite comfortable, which is a wonderful thing, to share your story with us here. And I thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
I do have three final questions that I ask all of my guests. And the first of those is, who is Don Sanders?
Who is Dawn Sanders? Oh, wow. I'm a daughter, um, and a Christ follower, and someone who wants to help people rebuild their lives.
What gets you up in the morning?
What gives me up in the morning?
Yeah, what gets you up in the morning?
Opportunities to operate in my purpose. I'm um, a writer and a speaker, uh, and opportunities to serve the kingdom.
And what was your best day?
What was my best day?
Mhm.
Oh, wow. I want to, I think people might think that I would say the day I got married, but I actually think the day he proposed
Mm.
was my best day.
Mm.
Okay.
And I want to thank you again for joining us here on the program, Don Sanders, encouraging people to go to your website, and that is donmansanders.com, DAWNMANSANDERS.com will be linked. Go ahead.
It's actually man with two N's.
Okay, so MANNSANDERS We'll have that correct and the link going straight to your website. And I thank you so much once again for joining us. And I thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World, where we're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. And until our next broadcast, podcast, videocast, love to all. Jeanette, I am still listening. Dad, continue to be happy because I am. Smokey, I'll see you on the other side. Mike, thanks for letting me be in your life. And to my dear friend Zorro, aho, aho.